Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where the Trump administration is heading into a high-stakes diplomatic test with Vice President JD Vance on his way to Pakistan right now for peace talks with Iran. Those are expected to begin tomorrow. But the situation is volatile, with both the U.S. and Iran accusing each other of violating a ceasefire agreement that was supposed to pave the way for these negotiations. This morning, Vice President Vance left Washington, heading to Islamabad, where he will lead the U.S. delegation alongside Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. The vice president spoke briefly to reporters, delivering a warning to Iran.
Look, we're looking forward to the negotiation. I think it's going to be positive. We'll, of course, see. As the President of the United States said, if the Iranians are willing to negotiate in good faith, we're certainly willing to extend the open hand. If they're going to try to play us, then they're going to find that the negotiating team is not that receptive. So we're going to try to have a positive negotiation. The President has gave us some pretty clear guidelines, and we're going to see.
Ahead of the talks, President Trump is clearly trying to ramp up pressure on the Iranians and threatening renewed military action if the talks fail. The president posting on social media, Iran is doing a very poor job of reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which he claims Tehran promised to do. Also telling Iran it has, quote, no cards, and saying the only reason they are alive today is to negotiate. In an interview with the New York Post, the president also saying the military is, quote, loading up the ships with the best weapons ever made. And if there's no deal, quote, we will be using those weapons. Tehran, meanwhile, is hitting back. Iran's Speaker of the Parliament, who is leading the Iranian delegation to the peace talks, saying there will be no negotiations unless there is a ceasefire between Israel and the Iranian-backed proxy Hezbollah in Lebanon, along with the release of Iranian assets frozen by sanctions. But these were the images out of southern Lebanon today, another major explosion as Israel continues its heavy bombardment of Hezbollah. As for the Strait of Hormuz, the other major sticking point leading up to this weekend's peace talks, Iran says the strait remains closed, with traffic through that waterway at a near standstill. According to S&P Global Market Intelligence, only 2 vessels transited the strait, none of which were tankers. And joining me now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake and NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley is in Tel Aviv. Thanks to both of you for starting us off on this high-stakes day. Garrett, let me start with you. The president continuing to accuse Iran of violating the ceasefire. So what exactly is the administration thinking is realistic to get out of these talks?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the White House, as you might expect, is projecting total confidence that they'll get, a sort of broad-based deal out of all of this. But I think the thing that they most need is an agreement on the Strait of Hormuz, the closure of which was the thing that had been most under the president's skin these last couple of weeks, had led to those threats about, erasing Iran's civilization. And to the graphic you just showed, to the point you just made, it's still very much not open, despite the fact that that was the basis, the president said, for him declaring this ceasefire to be operational in the first place on Tuesday. So I think that's potentially the lowest hanging fruit, but also the key kind of economic win that they need to achieve out of these talks over the next couple of days. Whether they're able to go beyond that or not, I think is very much an open question. But the administration believes they've been successful enough in their military goals that they don't necessarily need an agreement on, ballistic missiles or nuclear production right now, that they've weakened Iran so much in those areas. They can talk about those things later, perhaps.
Well, it's an interesting timeline that you lay out, Garrett. Let me ask you, because Vice President JD Vance leading these talks, it's notable because, of course, according to our reporting, initially in private conversations with President Trump, he was one of the top voices opposed to going into a war with Iran. Once the president gave the green light, it's our understanding the vice president was on board with making sure that the war was waged effectively. Talk about the stakes for the vice president, who's, of course, a potential 2028 hopeful as well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I was talking to someone close to the vice president, close to this White House today, who made the point that all of that being said, the vice president goes into this knowing that he is there to speak for the president, not for his own particular political views on this, and that while the president may give him a little bit more latitude than other officials to negotiate, at the end of the day, any deal is going to be something that has to be agreed to by the president. This person also kind of pushed off my question about whether Vance's lack of experience in this area could come back to bite him, basically saying that, the experienced professionals on Iran are the ones who got us into this 47 years of a standoff with the Iranians as they maybe were trying to develop a nuclear weapon. They think Vance brings a certain degree of credibility, tells the Iranians we're serious about peace, and is someone new for them to talk to after they've lost a huge degree of trust in Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, with whom they were negotiating twice over the last year when the bombs started falling on Iran.
Well, that's such an important point, Garrett, and explains why we may see the vice president there leading this delegation. Let's talk about the political pressures President Trump is feeling at home. We are starting to hear from some of his most outspoken MAGA supporters who are very clear they're not in support of this war. But more so, we're starting to see the impact on the economy, those high gas prices. We got an inflation number today that was not good for the president. And of course, all of the volatility that we've been watching on Wall Street, Garrett. If these talks fall apart, what recourse does the White House have? Is the president going to resume this war, which is so unpopular with the American public?
Yeah, the options are all bad here for the White House if the talks don't work, Chris said. I mean, it speaks to the asymmetry of this moment where the U.S. can dominate Iran on the battlefield, but still need to work with them to get the economic outcomes that we'd like here. But the president insists that he's willing to go right back to dropping bombs and firing missiles. He gave kind of an aggressive-sounding interview to the New York Post today saying all the ships are being reloaded in this moment. But all the ships in the world, weren't, at least as they were deployed in this conflict before Tuesday, able to get the Strait of Hormuz open to a degree that, could kind of calm these energy markets. And it's not clear that that'll change, next week or the week after. So really, it's going to be talks, or it's going to be another thing that the White House doesn't really like, which is a reliance on allies globally to perhaps create the kind of coalition that critics have argued should have existed on the front end to police the Strait or convince the Iranians that some kind of negotiated settlement, if not peace, is the way to get everybody back to where they want, because those economic numbers are just not sustainable as we head into a midterm year for Republicans, especially with so many of the loudest voices in the MAGA sphere, if you will, the Tucker Carlsons and Megyn Kellys of the world, being very upset to find this administration in this moment.
Yeah, Garrett, I think it's an important point, that term not sustainable. Garrett Haake, starting us off from the White House. Thank you so much, Garrett. Really appreciate it. Matt Bradley, I want to turn to you now, live in Tel Aviv. Talk to me about your conversations with officials in Israel. How closely are they watching these talks in Islamabad? What are they watching for?
Well, very, very closely, of course. I mean, this is a make or break moment. I mean, what they're watching for really is to salvage what they have left, Kristen. The fact is, this all started out with this war in Iran as a dream for Benjamin Netanyahu and his partners in government. And now it's a nightmare. Why? Well, because Israel no longer has any traction on these negotiations. They're going to be doing it secondhand, basically through the United States. They have no diplomatic relations with Pakistan, so they can't even send delegates to this meeting. But this is important because what we've seen in the past couple of weeks is that Israel, you could say, as the kids say, shot their shot. They went after Iran, and now they have essentially some sort of ceasefire that's been imposed on them. And we've seen that in Iran and then lately in Lebanon, the Israelis seeming to rush to catch up to meet their military objectives before the door closes. The door has closed on Iran. The Israelis are no longer firing missiles at Iran, but not in Lebanon. But it is closing with substantial pressure from the Trump administration on Benjamin Netanyahu to stop their fight in Lebanon against Hezbollah in order to push ahead with these treaty negotiations in Pakistan. This is a very, very delicate moment for the Israelis. They are both trying to reach out to the Lebanese government, distinct from Hezbollah, while at the same time continuing their fight against Hezbollah, which is an Iranian proxy. It is a very, very difficult diplomatic maneuver, but it's going to be essential, not just for Israel and Lebanon, but for the U.S. and Iran and the entire region, because it plays such a central role in these negotiations to solidify the ceasefire between Iran on one side and Israel and the U.S. on the other.
Matt, let me follow up with you on that point. President Trump urged Prime Minister Netanyahu to scale back his attacks against Hezbollah in Lebanon. Has that actually happened? What are you seeing there?
Well, it looks as though these are smaller attacks than what we saw about 2 days ago, when we saw what was essentially, as the Israelis described, the largest strikes and the most expansive, most powerful attacks against Hezbollah in generations. So that was hard to beat. So it has diminished since then, since that extremely high level of violence that Israel was meting out against Hezbollah. But whether or not it's gone down to the level of what we might call a restrained fight, or what President Trump wants, or what the Iranians want, or what Hezbollah wants, or what the Lebanese government wants, well, it looks like the Israelis are still continuing to attack Hezbollah in a ferocious manner. Hezbollah is still firing rockets into northern Israel. So the fight over northern Israel's border in Lebanon is not over, not by a long shot. It could be over if President Trump put enough pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to stop that fight. But for now, it looks like Israel is trying to have it both ways, reaching out to the Lebanese government to create some sort of more permanent diplomatic solution, while at the same time trying to bludgeon Hezbollah, trying to make sure they are finished once and for all militarily, not diplomatically.
All right, Matt Bradley live for us in Tel Aviv. Matt, please continue to stay safe. We really appreciate it. Thank you for that reporting. Joining me now is Pakistan's ambassador to the U.S., Rizwan Saeed Sheikh. As we've said, Pakistan is hosting and mediating this weekend's talks between the U.S. and Iran. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kristen, for having me.
Well, this is a critical moment, and Pakistan is the mediator in these high-stakes talks. Let's just set the scene here, because Pakistan's parliamentary, or I should say Iran's parliamentary speaker, who's leading the talks from the Iranian side, is saying that the talks will not move forward if there's not an actual ceasefire in Lebanon. It sounds like Israel has scaled back its attacks, but hasn't halted the attacks altogether. Do you think these talks are actually going to happen tomorrow?
I think a lot of diplomatic effort and intense diplomatic effort has gone into bringing things to this good stage where it stands. And Pakistan, in keeping with its long-standing tradition of making things happen on the international scene, has certainly put in a lot. Our partners, multiple partners, countries like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt have certainly made a lot of effort. Others have made a lot of effort. So while this thing has been brought to this stage, and the delegations are either flying in or have already flown in, I believe the talks are very much on the cards. And if there are any issues, perhaps, that might not have been resolved to the satisfaction of either of the two conflicting parties, I believe those are threads that can be picked up within the talks themselves. And once they sit down in Islamabad tomorrow and discuss matters at length, if there are any wrinkles that need to be ironed out before that, that should be done. But since the delegations are either airborne, as I said, or are already there, it stands to happen, I believe.
Okay, so you're confident these talks are going to move forward. I want to be very clear on where Pakistan stands. Do you believe that there needs to be a ceasefire that applies to Lebanon in order for these talks to move forward? Because the White House and Israel is saying Lebanon was not a part of the ceasefire agreement. Iran says that's not the case. How do you see it?
I think whatever has been part of discussions going into these talks needs to be honored, whether it is one or the other point, and would certainly have a salutary impact on not just the optics or, completion of the process that has gone into reaching this stage, but the substantive discussions themselves.
I want to play you a little bit of what Vice President JD Vance had to say about the situation and Iran's lead negotiator. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I think this comes from a legitimate misunderstanding. I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. Let me just say this. I actually wonder how good he is at understanding English, because there are things that he said that frankly didn't make sense in the context of the negotiations that we've had. So
Vice President JD Vance saying this is all a big misunderstanding. What do you say to people who hear that and say, if there was a misunderstanding about the very definition of what a ceasefire should look like, how can an agreement be reached to end these hostilities in Iran, which is far more complicated?
I think the most significant part of this whole episode that would start unfolding in Islamabad tomorrow is the constructive spirit with which both sides have approached it. I mean, it would not have been agreed to had they not been confident of the talks in Islamabad, or had they not been ready to conduct those talks in Islamabad. So while they agreed to it, and they are, I mean, either they are already there or they are on way to Islamabad as we speak, it stands to take place. And I mean, it is in the nature of conflict that it is not fully resolved until it is resolved. So that is where it's a work in progress. And if there are matters that need to be fine-tuned, the process itself, the talks themselves, will address it.
And there are so many sticking points, and they're very complicated issues. What do you think can be accomplished in these talks? In other words, what are the tangible results that you think can be achieved?
Well, as a facilitator,
yeah,
the role is to bring the conflicting parties together and let them decide what satisfies them or what does not. But in diplomacy, we say that at the end of any negotiation, if both sides have a good or an equal measure of comfort or an equal measure of discomfort, then the negotiations are successful because you find the way forward. So as a facilitator, Pakistan basically is bringing them together. And we would be ready to afford maybe advice if it is solicited, if it is required, on whichever aspect it is required, and to the extent that it is required. Because ultimately it is upon the conflicting parties themselves to strike a solution. So while we wish them well, we bring the good intentions of the entire international community, because we have been receiving calls. Our leadership has been, 50 plus only yesterday of support. So while everybody is watching with bated breath and hoping that this brings a result, what is the result exactly that the two sides are looking for will only be known at the end of it.
I have to ask you, because President Trump has warned, has threatened to hit Iran hard if no deal is reached. Do you take President Trump at his words?
I think in a conflict, hostilities are basically the name of the game. They have taken place. For now, there is an agreement on ceasefire. And for now, the word of President Trump, the word of the Iranian leadership, that they are ready to hold hostilities and go for a negotiated settlement, lend dialogue and diplomacy space and opportunity, is more in play and should be focused on. If we get this right, I think we would not have to go anywhere else.
Well, it would be hugely significant. Ambassador Sheikh, thank you so much for being here to bring us your perspective on this critical matter at this critical moment.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you. Wonderful to have you. Turning now to the economic fallout from the war against Iran as the conflict pushes consumer prices higher and consumer confidence lower. The Labor Department today reporting that prices jumped nearly a full percentage point in March compared to a month earlier, and 3.3% higher compared to a year ago. Those numbers fueled by the largest one-month increase in gas prices in nearly 60 years. Now, a separate survey from the University of Michigan found consumers are growing more pessimistic about the economy, with consumer sentiment falling to a record low in April, down nearly 11% from March. Although we should note that most of this data was collected before this week's ceasefire agreement. NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung joins me now. Brian, thanks so much for being here. So break down these numbers. What do they tell us about the health of the economy and how much the war with Iran is impacting these figures.
Yeah, Kristen, and your context is so important because this report does not cover the ceasefire, but it is the first report that we're getting that shows the beginnings of this war, again, because it covers the month of March. As you pointed out, 3.3%. That's the price change for everything here in America as far as the price tags that we as consumers see at the store, on the roads, everywhere. 3.3% higher in March of this year compared to March of last year. And you'll notice that is a notable acceleration from the 2.4% that we saw in the February to February period. I should point out, though, economists were expecting this to be high because of rising energy prices. And here's where the breakdown is seen in terms of food, energy, and shelter. Now what we're talking about are monthly figures. How much did prices change between February and March? Energy prices up by, get this, almost 11% in just 1 month. A lot of that because of the soaring price of gasoline as a result of the ships that were stuck in the Strait of Hormuz. Food prices going sideways, although we'll be watching for that because fertilizer was also stuck in the Strait. That could lead to higher food prices in months to come, but also shelter costs only up 0.3%. We watch that because that is the biggest expenditure for most Americans, just putting a roof over your head. We'll be watching for that as well.
Well, I want to ask you about the ceasefire. Has it actually had an impact on gas prices? President Trump has said when the war ends, the gas prices are going to start to drop immediately.
Yeah, well, we did see gas prices, as far as measured by AAA on a daily basis, fall by 1 cent to $4.15. But I should point out that, again, this is the overall picture on inflation rates. But when we look at gas prices, it has still been enormously higher compared to where it was prior to this war beginning. We were looking at sub $3 a gallon averages prior to this war beginning. But again, we soared well above $4 a gallon. And actually, that happened around the time that we flipped the calendar from March into April, which makes this data so important to think about within the context of it was collected over the period of March. So if you look at the April numbers, gas prices were continuing to rise. That's the reason why economists that we've heard from so far today have said it's really going to be that April report where we see inflation not just further in the categories of gasoline, but potentially in things like food, in things like car prices, other types of categories as well, Kristen.
Brian, before I let you go, I have to ask you about this new figure we're getting from the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Survey. It shows it fell 11% in April. What does that tell you about how consumers feel the war is impacting their finances?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's as simple as Americans don't feel good about their finances as a result of the war. It's notable that the University of Michigan saying that that number is the lowest that they've seen on record. They've only been doing this since about the early 2010s, to be fair. But nonetheless, you see what's happening at the pump. Prices are rising. That has led to a noticeable decline in how Americans feel about the economy. The concern is that this could ripple into the economy from the standpoint of Americans just choosing not to spend because they feel so pessimistic about the economy. That would start a chain of events that could really lead to other types of economic indicators deteriorating as well. We'll have to see.
All right, Brian Chung, tracking it all for us. Thank you so much for being here on this Friday. We really appreciate it. And coming up, all eyes on Islamabad. We are digging deeper into the high-stakes effort underway right now to keep peace talks on track as the accusations fly and Israel pounds Hezbollah. Plus, Cuba in crisis. More key takeaways from my exclusive historic sit-down interview with the president of Cuba and what he told me about putting his life on the line as the island nation faces a dire economic emergency and takeover threats from the Trump administration. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Iranian state media is now reporting that Iran's negotiating delegation has arrived in Pakistan ahead of the talks with the U.S. Now, as we noted, President Trump is threatening military action if a deal is not reached with Iran, saying U.S. naval ships in the Middle East are being loaded up with new weapons. The president telling the New York Post, quote, "We're going to find out in about 24 hours. We're going to know soon about whether or not the talks are a success." But Iran says it won't move forward with the peace talks unless there is a ceasefire in Lebanon and sanctions on Iranian assets are lifted, raising the question about whether these negotiations will actually lead to success. Joining me now is Elise Labott, host of the podcast Cosmopolitics. Elise, thank you so much for being here. Great to see you. Really appreciate your being here. I want to start off with these high-stakes talks in Pakistan. You just heard my conversation with the ambassador. What are you going to be watching for this weekend, Elise? And do you expect these talks to move forward, given everything that we're seeing with Lebanon?
I think they're going to start taking place.
Okay.
I think they're going to sit down tomorrow. And I think, you know, that you heard the president say, I'm telling Israel to low-key it.
Yes, right.
on the airstrikes. And you did see that the Israelis and the Lebanese are going to be sitting down for negotiations. Look, the Lebanese have not been as forward-leaning as the U.S. or Israel would like them to be in terms of trying to disarm Hezbollah. But you do have a Lebanese government now, more so than in any period in recent history, that is willing to try and defang Hezbollah and take more control. And they've been looking to have these negotiations for a while. And so the fact that they're sitting down, I think, is really important.
Talk about this delegation led by Vice President JD Vance. It's reported that Iran actually asked for Vance to be the lead here and not Kushner and Witkoff, who will be a part of the delegation as well. I think it's notable because the vice president was initially opposed to the war. Once the president pressed the green light, he said, OK, I'm going to be on board with trying to carry it out effectively. What do you make of the makeup of this delegation?
Well, I think Vice President Vance has said some really interesting things over the last few days about they don't speak English very well. They really didn't understand us. And then when the president said there was a 10-point plan of Iran's that was workable, the vice president said, well, that's not the bad plan that you're thinking about. I've seen some other plans. So, you know, there's a lot of kind of smoke and mirrors going on. I think the vice president seems pretty forward-leaning about a deal. But my understanding from talking to some of the Gulf allies that, you know, really want any deal with the Iranians to be ironclad in terms of their security, in terms of the Strait opening up, in terms of dealing with some of these threats by Iran. They're happy that Jared Kushner is at the table because they say Jared is not wedded to a deal. He understands the Gulf. Obviously, he's doing business with them, but he understands the Gulf. He understands their need, and he's not going to walk away with some, you know, less than, you know, some mediocre deal. I think the best we can hope for tomorrow, Kristen, and I think the Pakistani ambassador was trying to say this without saying it so directly as to be less than diplomatic, is let this start a process. Let the two sides begin to talk. If there's a deal tomorrow, it's not going to be durable. You know, there's so many years of distrust. There's so many things to work out. If there's enough to keep going and both sides are still operating in good faith, I think they're thinking there that, you know, that's enough to have a process. And maybe that could curb down the tensions.
I think that's such an important point, that people should lower their expectations.
Yeah,
that
there's not going to be a
some
deal
grand
tomorrow.
deal.
Right.
That what there may be is a prolonged ceasefire, and that in and of itself.
And the ambassador was kind of saying, look, this could be the beginning of a process, but both sides need to operate in good faith. And, oh, yeah, President Trump, please don't bomb the Iranians while we're talking like you did the last two times. That was implicit, but he didn't say it out loud. He was saying that both sides need to, you know, come with good faith. And I think that's what he meant.
Well, we know that a number of countries, the entire world, will be watching closely, including Cuba. You have done extensive reporting on Cuba, on that region. I was just there interviewing the president of Cuba. I appreciate your being here to help break it down a little bit. I want to play a little bit of my interview. Elise, this is when I asked the president to respond to President Trump's threats that Cuba could be next. Take a look at what he has to say. Are you afraid for yourself, for your family, or are you prepared to, as you say, make the ultimate sacrifice if you are attacked?
I have no fear. I am willing to give my life for the revolution. Of course, I wouldn't like that to be the attitude of the U.S. government. I think the American people is a sensitive people. And they wouldn't allow, or they wouldn't see with good eyes that their government, the country, would invade a very small island that does not pose any concern in terms of national security for the United States.
I'm willing to give my life. Defiance, Elise. He said he thinks a deal is possible with the Trump administration, but would not commit to any concessions, including that he would step down. What do you make of what we heard?
He's willing to give his life, but he's not willing to step down. And you interviewed the deputy foreign minister a few weeks ago. That was kind of a little bit, you know, everyone's saying the right things for the Cuban government in terms of we're not going to make concessions. If it's kind of like Venezuela or even Iran, if you can keep the system in place and get rid of the figurehead at the top, the figurehead is just a figurehead. And so it may be that the Cubans are willing to sacrifice the president, and maybe that's not why the Cuban president is willing to, be forward-leaning on a deal, because he knows he could be the one. But listen, they gave this interview to you for a reason. The foreign minister spoke to you for a reason, and there are talks going on. I think what's really important right now is that they are worried. You heard President Trump just say the other day, oh, the U.S. military is ready to move on from Iran and go to its next conquest. They are worried that it's Cuba. Is President Trump thinking? We don't know. He says he thinks it's going well. Is it not going well in Iran? Does he want to turn the page? That's what the Cubans are afraid of.
Well, they're afraid, and they're watching so closely to see what might happen next.
Just the beginning.
It really is. Elise Levitt, thank you so much. Great to have you. Really appreciate all of your great analysis. Coming up next, countdown to splashdown. We're just hours away from the epic conclusion of the Artemis II crew's record-breaking journey around the moon. We will walk you through what to expect and the dangers that lie ahead. Stay with us on Meet the Press Now. Look at this. Welcome back. After 10 days in space, the crew on board NASA's Artemis II is about to embark on the most dangerous 15 minutes of its mission, returning to Earth. Here's a live look at the crew's Orion capsule just hours before its return home. That capsule is slated to begin its re-entry to the Earth's atmosphere just before 8 p.m. Eastern Time, before splashing down in the Pacific Ocean near San Diego. The capsule expected to be exposed to temperatures of around 5,000 degrees. That is about half the temperature of the sun's surface. Artemis's return will mark the end of its history-making mission, which included capturing these stunning photos of the moon's surface. The mission also marking the farthest humans have ever traveled from Earth. NBC's Liz Kreutz joins me now from San Diego. Liz, thanks so much for being here. So you have the best assignment, basically, of the day. Let's start off with just putting this into context, Liz. Why is re-entry so dangerous? Break it down for us.
Yeah, we are very lucky to be in beautiful San Diego right now for this historic moment. And it is so dangerous, Kristen, like you mentioned, mainly because of the heat, also because of the speed. It will be entering the Earth's atmosphere at 25,000 miles an hour. But it really comes down to the heat. And it's hard to think about this moment and that re-entry moment without recalling what happened during the Columbia Space Shuttle disaster in 2003, when one of the heat shields broke, or part of it broke, and it ultimately led to the space shuttle disintegrating in that re-entry period, killing all 7 astronauts on board. So this is a very exciting moment, but it is also extremely dangerous. Thankfully, by all accounts, NASA says they are well prepared for this moment and are very confident it's going to be successful today.
Yeah, we are so thankful to hear that as we eagerly await that re-entry. Walk us through what we can expect during that 15-minute period.
Yeah, so re-entry is going to happen into the atmosphere. Will happen around 4:53 p.m. California time, 7:53 your time. There'll be a 6-minute window then where we get no communications, a communication blackout with the astronauts. That is going to be the most intense period. We're all going to be on pins and needles. Eventually, they will reemerge, and that is when parachutes will be deployed. The Orion capsule will dramatically decrease in speed and ultimately splash down about 60 miles off the coast here in San Diego at about 20 miles per hour. And there's Navy dive teams and medical teams that have been training for over a year for this moment. They will be right there to retrieve the astronauts, to check on them. They will then be helicoptered from the Orion capsule to the USS Murpha recovery ship that is there. They'll be treated again and evaluated, and then they will be helicoptered to right behind me here at the Navy base here in Coronado. And if they are all feeling well, they will then be flown tonight to Houston.
Well, we know the whole country will be watching. Liz, thank you so very much. And please tune in tonight for special live coverage of the Artemis II splashdown. It all takes off at 7:30 Eastern right here on NBC News Now. Coming up after the break, NBC News exclusive reporting on the lengths White House officials are going to exact revenge on lawmakers who defy the president. That story's next on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back now to an NBC News exclusive showing just how far President Trump is willing to go in his effort to exact revenge on the Republican state lawmakers who broke with him last year, opposing a redistricting plan for Indiana. President Trump endorsed Republican Brenda Wilson in a race against State Senator Greg Good, one of 7 Republicans who voted against the Trump-backed Indiana redistricting plan. But the White House worried a third candidate, Alexandra Wilson, could play the spoiler, allowing Good to win. So the Trump administration pushed Wilson to end her campaign. Wilson shared exclusively with NBC's Jane Timm voicemails, text messages, and phone conversations she recorded with the White House, both enticing her to leave the race with potential job opportunities and warning her of possible attacks against her if she stayed in the race. Here's part of a phone conversation Wilson had with White House political director Matt Brazo, which she recorded.
I don't know if there's something that, we can elevate you to be a bigger impact to the people of your community. I'm just trying to think outside the box to where we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and you have the ability to affect change and do exactly what you're talking about doing, but also we have the ability to take out Greg Good and move on.
NBC News senior reporter Jane Timm broke that story and spoke exclusively to Alexandra Wilson. She joins me now. Jane, first of all, this is a huge scoop. Congratulations. Really fantastic reporting. Start off by explaining who Alexandra Wilson is and why the Trump administration wanted her out of this race.
Thank you so much. You know, Alexandra Wilson is a 34-year-old. She's a mom. She's a network engineer. She decided she wanted to run for office because she was really worried about a big renovation project to her local schools and how it might raise her taxes. You know, she said life's really expensive right now, and I'm concerned about this. But because she shares a surname with, and she has no relation to, the Trump-endorsed candidate Brenda Wilson, the White House thought she might be a spoiler, as you said, that people might be confused because her first name is Alexandra. Her name would come first on the ballot versus Brenda Wilson. And they said, you know, she might split the opposition vote and help Greg Good, the incumbent that Trump wants out of office, to help him survive his primary. People said that it was a dirty trick by Democrats or a plant from the other campaign. Alexandra Wilson says she just wanted to make a difference in her community.
It's just extraordinary. And you actually spoke to her. Take us inside that interview. What did she tell you, Jane?
We had a long conversation as she was driving back from Indianapolis, where she had to go for the election commission because a local Republican lawyer and an ally of Governor Mike Braun has been challenging her eligibility to appear on the ballot. And, you know, I talked to her about this and I asked her how she felt. She said she found some of these things insulting. Let's play a little bit of our conversation about what she thought.
I have been accused of dirty tricks, political dirty tricks. This is exactly what is a political dirty trick. I'm a legitimate candidate with concerns for my district that would like to represent my district, and I have every right to be involved as anybody else on the ballot.
And she said she was not dissuaded from her campaign. She said it was exactly the wrong strategy to go about it. She is even more determined to compete in this race.
Well, it's pretty remarkable that not only is she not deterred by this pressure campaign, but she's sharing all of this information. So what has the reaction been from the White House, Jane? Are we hearing from officials there?
Yeah, you know, I called the White House to ask them what they thought. Caroline Leavitt, she said this is just what, quote, this is what the political team does. They talk to candidates around the country. It's not coming from a place of malice. She said, you know, the president is intimately involved in races up and down the ballot, and that this is just how his White House operates. But it's important to say this isn't an open seat. This isn't about the imperiled control of Congress. This is a Republican primary in a deep red state for a part-time legislature. You know, these jobs are about $33,000 salaries a year. It's not even a full-time job. So this is really, in large part, about the president's desire for political revenge, that he's laser focused on this race.
Have you heard from Brenda Wilson or Greg Good, Jane?
You know, neither of them wanted to comment for this story. No one got back to me, the other candidates. But Greg Good has been tweeting this story quite a bit today, posting that he was legislating while people were trying to get him out of the race.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, we'll see how it all shakes out. Jane Timm, thank you for bringing us this exclusive reporting. We really appreciate it. And still to come, is it a turning point? President Trump spars with several high-profile conservative influencers over his threats to wipe out an entire civilization in Iran. What the escalating MAGA feud could mean for the midterms. The panel's next. This is Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. President Trump is lashing out at several big-name conservative media figures after they publicly criticized his threats earlier this week to wipe out Iranian civilization. The president bashing those media figures who've been among his staunchest supporters in the past, calling them all, quote, low IQ, nut jobs, troublemakers and losers just trying to latch on to MAGA. Joining me now to break this all down is our panel, Daniela Diaz, congressional reporter for Notice, Kendra Barkoff, former spokesperson to then Vice President Joe Biden and managing director at SKDK, and Rob Bluey, president and executive editor of the Daily Signal. Thanks to all of you for being here. Daniela, let me start with you. So my colleague John Allen reported earlier this week that the rift that was forming in MAGA world over the president's threats about Iran to wipe out the entire Iranian civilization have backfired. That we see all of these MAGA figures speaking out and saying enough is enough. What do you make of this? Is it just these loud voices, or are we starting to see some real cracks?
It should be a major warning sign for President Donald Trump that some of his staunchest followers, people who have advocated and promoted him, especially leading up to the 2024 November election, are now speaking against this Iran war. I mean, it should be concerning him, and maybe that Truth Social post that he had criticizing them and their concerns of this war, he should probably be listening to what they're saying when they're the base. I was in Iowa earlier this week with Senator Alyssa Slotkin, and I talked to a lot of voters. And the Iran war is something that they do not understand on both sides. And they're seeing their gas prices go up. It's really hard to explain to American voters the mechanics and the foreign relations of why we're in this war in the first place. It's not something that's really reaching the American voter across the country. And so this is a huge thing that Donald Trump is going to have to explain, especially considering these midterms are going to be so essential for him to keep the majority.
Absolutely. Rob, put this into context in what you're seeing, because the White House, the president's aides say this is not a real break in MAGA, that if you look at polling of the president's base supporters, they are still firmly behind him. Is that the case, or do you think that his support is starting to fray among some of his staunchest supporters?
Well, President Trump needs to stay focused on the mission, and that is completing the job in Iran and then getting refocused on the domestic issues that Daniela talked about. I mean, there are so many things leading up to this midterm election that will be at stake. And I think you covered it earlier in the show, Chris. I mean, militarily, they're having success. Politically, they're having a challenge explaining it. And every time you are explaining in politics, you're probably losing. And I think that what the president was doing yesterday was sending a clear message to the Tucker Carlsons and Megyn Kellys of the world that he's not going to be intimidated or bullied. Now, from a messaging standpoint, I'm not sure I would have taken the bait, because you know what Tucker Carlson did today? He put out new merchandise with low IQ on a hat, and now he's trying to make the most of it and draw more attention to himself.
Kendra, how does this all play in the midterms? Because people are focused on the economy and affordability. This is a foreign policy issue. Right now, it's obviously very in focus. But do you think that by November, the page gets turned back to the economy?
I don't, because people have been paying for high prices the entirety that he has been president of the United States. You had his own advisors in a New York Times article saying publicly, this is not what MAGA voted for. Getting into foreign wars is not what our base has voted for. And so when you're having his own advisors in the New York Times publicly say, this is not what we voted for, how are you going to get the mainstream Republicans to vote for him in the fall? You're going to see a major shift.
Rob, respond to that. And the fact that President Trump said this is an excursion, but boy, he is looking for a way out, and it's not clear he's found the exit route.
I do think the party probably comes together, and that MAGA base is there. Whether there's the turnout is a question that I think we can debate, and we'll have to wait and see. It's the independent voters that had broken for President Trump in 2016 and 2024 that I think he probably most has to worry about when it comes to these congressional and Senate races, because if they're displeased with the direction of the country and they see that the price of gas is still high and groceries and rent and all of those things are at levels they they were under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, yeah, they're going to be facing some headwinds.
All right, let's talk about the Democrats now, because many potential 2028 hopefuls have converged at this conference hosted by the Reverend Al Sharpton. Former Vice President Kamala Harris made some comments today that are raising some eyebrows, getting a lot of attention. Let's play them, get everyone's reaction on the other side.
Listen, I might. I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about it in the context of then, is who and where and how can the best job be done for the American people? That's how I'm thinking about it.
Daniela, that, of course, in a response to whether she's thinking about running for president again. What do you make of that response? She seems to be increasingly leaning into the idea of running.
I'm not surprised. I don't know if anyone here is surprised. I mean, look, let's go back to the November 2024 election. It was a situation where she became the nominee because of a lot of criticism of then President Joe Biden. I covered all of that outrage from House Democrats, Senate Democrats during that time. And it's now possibly going to be a new opportunity for her to run for president. I mean, it's going to be a very crowded field. Like I said, I was just with Alyssa Slotkin in Iowa. She did not rule it out. I mean, there's probably going to be dozens of candidates.
A lot of people not ruling it out.
Even at this conference with Al Sharpton. I mean, it's a dozen people that he's been speaking to about running for president. But I'm not surprised that she's eyeing this, considering she might want another opportunity, and this time on her own merit.
Kendra, given the devastating loss in 2024, how do other Democrats hear what they heard from the vice president, and who are you watching for?
I think this is all about wanting to be relevant, right? I think at the end of the day, nobody wants to be left behind. Nobody wants to be forgotten about. Everybody runs for office because, let's be honest, everybody has a little bit of an ego. And so I think this is her wanting to stay relevant with the party and people to not forget about her. I mean, you have Donald Trump, who constitutionally cannot run again and fully has not ruled out the fact that he won't try to run again. So I think she wants to stay a part of the conversation, whether or not, she ends up pulling the trigger at the end of the day. It is something to be seen. But I do think that Democrats are looking for a fresh face and are wanting people who haven't been in politics in the past. And I think that's frankly why Trump kind of won the first time around. If he wasn't a part of this, they'd want somebody new and fresh and somebody who thinks outside of the box and different.
Part of the generational battle that we're seeing.
I think so.
Inside the party. Rob, let's talk about the Republicans. A lot of people think Vice President JD Vance is the heir apparent. And yet we have seen Secretary of State Marco Rubio emerge as, obviously, given the war in Iran, someone who has taken the lead on a number of issues, increasingly in President Trump's favor. How do you see that field playing out as we get closer to 2028?
It's going to be fascinating to watch, Kristen. And you know as well as I do that foreign policy has dominated this second term of President Trump, probably more so than I expected it would. And that's given Marco Rubio this national stage in which he is often at the center of these conversations. Now, JD Vance obviously playing a big role this coming weekend in terms of the Iran war. So, I mean, it'll give him an opportunity to demonstrate what he's able to accomplish. But I ultimately think that Rubio, if JD Vance moves forward, will defer. He's indicated that publicly, and I think he'll probably keep his word.
Kendra, who do Democrats fear more, JD Vance or Marco Rubio? Who would be the tougher candidate for Democrats?
That is an excellent question. I think, winning the primary, I think it'll be Marco Rubio. I think the tougher candidate for Democrats is Marco Rubio. Nobody wants to see JD Vance.
What do you think? I mean, in terms of how this is playing out politically speaking, here we have JD Vance on the world stage leading these talks to try to bring this war to an end. He has sort of reemerged, even though the Secretary of State has gotten a lot of attention recently.
Well, and I think we all read the New York Times story was referenced earlier. And it seems that JD Vance played a huge role in trying to advise President Donald Trump against this war. And that's a narrative that could help him in a year when it comes time. But I know that things can really change in the next 2 years. And there may be a situation where we don't remember this moment. And in 2 years, we're in a completely different situation. And the country looks completely different and issues are completely different. And who knows where we'll be then.
Yeah, great points. All right, guys, great conversation. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much for watching. Meet the Press Now will be back on Monday. And if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press on your local NBC News station. I'll have exclusive interviews with the president of Cuba, Congressman Byron Donalds, and Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. You do not want to miss it. There is much more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.